Okay. Welcome everyone, new and old. It's so good to have everybody here. People who have been here or haven't been here in a while. I think we might need more sheets. Everyone has a sheet? No? Okay. So we might need to print a couple more. I printed 20 this week. Are we sure? Any more? Pass down. We've got one there. Is that one being used? That one, is that extra? That's Mama's. Okay. Everyone's got. Maybe just pass it down to the corner. All right. Welcome to chapter 5, Mishnah 12. Today's Lunch and Learn class is dedicated for the occasion of a Sefer Torah being donated in honor of Ilana Katz's children. Hazaku Baruch. What a special mitzvah it is. In fact, it's the last mitzvah in the Torah, is the mitzvah of writing a Sefer. Write for yourself this song, a magnificent mitzvah. So praiseworthy is someone who has the opportunity to write the Sefer, to dedicate it. Very, very special. Hazaku Baruch. May it bring you tremendous beracha for you and the entire family. Arba midot batalmidim. There are 4 measurements in students. Maher lishmoa u'maher la'abed. A student who quickly understands, they get it right away. You know, all you have to do is start telling the person the idea, and they picked it up. Maher lishmoa. But that same child, maher la'abed. Sometimes they're like, yeah, I know. And you say, yeah, what am I going to say? And then they get it wrong. You know those kids? Maher lishmoa, they're very fast, they pick it up so quickly. Maher la'abed, but they also lose what they picked up as quickly. Yatsa scharo behefsedo, same phrase that we had in previous Mishnayot. The reward, the advantage of being such a quick to the draw person to understand is lost in the quickness with which a person loses that. So, you're easy to learn, easy to forget. That person, whatever he gained, yatsa scharo behefsedo, in his loss. Kashe lishmoa, a second student is kashe lishmoa. It's difficult for him to understand. V'kashe la'abed, but once he gets it, it's very difficult for him to forget. He doesn't lose anything that he learned or that she learned. Yatsa hefsedo, the loss, the flaw of it taking long to be able to onboard something is done away. It's lost in the fact that the reward is so great that they remember whatever it is that they actually finally do on board. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu haolam shehakolim baro. The third student, maher lishmoa, is a student that is very quick to pick up. They understand things very easily. V'kashe le'abed, but it's difficult for them to forget. So whatever they learn, they remember. That student, zeh chelek tov, that is a good portion. And finally, kashe lishmoa u'maher la'abed. The final of the quadrant is a student that is very difficult to learn, and yet, with all the effort you put in, maher la'abed, they lose it very quickly. Zeh chelek ra, this is a bad portion. Now, it's very interesting to understand and to hold this Mishnah up against the Mishnayot that we've learned already. We learned about Arba midot be'adam. There are 4 characteristics or character traits in a person. We learned about a person's anger and being able to get angry quickly or slowly, being able to forgive quickly or slowly. That was 4 measurements, if you will, in the character of a person. We learned about 4 midot, right? What else did we learn about? Which other 4? Right? We learned about getting angry. Sorry? Temperament. Yeah, we spoke about temperament with regards to anger. We also spoke as well with regards to other elements of a person's character traits. Here the Mishnah is looking not at a midah of a person, but rather how a person was created, their natural tendencies and proclivities. And this is so interesting, because whereas when it came to anger, what do we call that person? We called the person who was maher, he got angry quick, and he was slow to forgive. We called that person a rasha. We call the person who it's very hard to get them angry, and they're very quick to forgive, like Hillel. We call that guy Chassid, he's pious. Over here, we don't say that the person who learns quickly and takes long to forget, that person is a tzaddik. We don't even call him chacham. What do we say? Chelek tov. He got a good portion. He was dealt a good hand. You see, because the Mishnah over here is not equating a person who gets knowledge quickly, or even a person who retains that knowledge. That's not associated with being good or being bad. These is just my natural tendencies. Am I someone who's very quick on the draw? Do I understand things quickly? Or do I have a good memory? That's not up to you. So therefore the Mishnah over here is just describing the 4 different types of students. And it's important to understand that this conversation is not being related vis-a-vis those of us who find ourselves in the process and in the world of teaching. Because students are actually children. Students are friends. Students are sometimes even parents. There's many times when we find ourselves in a teaching role. It might be your peers. I find it so interesting sometimes when I meet people who were once my rabbis, who tell me that they listen to the daily morning class every day. And it was so hard for me to compute. What does that mean? That this is someone who when I was in yeshiva, that I studied from them. And now they're listening to my class. I didn't understand. I couldn't get that. But the point is that maybe there are many areas in life in which they have an expertise that they are my teachers. But there are areas in which I can be their teachers. In fact, the rabbis tell us, Harbe lamadati mirabotai, much I learned from my teachers, more I learned from my friends. Umi talmidai, and from my students, yoter mikulam. From my students I learned more than everyone. What that means is that in some ironic state, what does it mean? The students have become the teacher. So I don't understand pshat in that Mishnah. Because the Mishnah says, much I learned from my rabbis, my teachers. More I learned from my friends. But most still I learned from my students. What does that mean that your students are? Your teachers. So then how could you say, much I learned from my teachers, more I learned from my friends, most of all I learned from my students, if the students are your teachers? Then it's a contradiction in the same Mishnah. And the answer is that oftentimes there's a method by which someone is taking in information. And the vessel that you see yourself as, vis-a-vis the person who's teaching you that thing, is remarkably different than the vessel you see yourself as when you're studying or learning that same bit of information from someone who is an equal or from someone who is less than. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine a rabbi tells you, he's your rabbi, really you should have a higher level of emunah, really you should be studying more, really you should be coming to shul for minyan, for every 3 times a day. What's your defense mechanism? Your defense mechanism is, that's for the rabbi. I'm not a rabbi. So the rabbi, what he's teaching is in his world. This Rebbitzin, what she's saying, it's like amazing, very nice. But that's like for people like her, who are Rebbitzins, they're Rabbanits, they're very holy people. Someone like me, I don't have what to learn from that. That's not where I'm holding. But suddenly, you hear, and I always say this, I always wondered, in the scientific community, we have something called a controlled experiment. What's a controlled experiment? Anyone know what a control? Yeah, you're shaking your head. What is it?
When you're doing an experiment, but you have everything is in place, and you're controlling the outcome.
You're controlling the outcome of the experiment. Not only that, not only the outcome of the experiment, yeah?
You have the experimental group and the control group. The control group does not receive the independent variable and the experimental group does.
Excellent. This is clearly something that you do. You said that with a high level of, you used all the right words. I think we know the idea, but then someone's like, this is what I do. Step aside, don't hurt yourself. Okay? Right? That was great. Perfect. Excellent. Right? Now, why do we do that in controlled experiments? Well, just a simple example. Because if I could give you the placebo and I could give you the medication, so maybe it's not the medication that's giving you or yielding the outcome, it's the placebo effect. And if the placebo effect is roughly the same as the medication effect, then actually the medication did nothing. Let me add to that in a controlled experiment. I'd also need to regulate what the test subjects were eating. Because if one of them lived on a macrobiotic diet, or one of them was in keto, or one of them was Atkins, or one of them was South Beach, maybe the benefits it's not from the medication, it's from the fact that they had this diet. If, as an example, I have a medication which is going to give you long life, and I give it to all the NBA players, and then I take and then I take the placebo effect, and I go bring it to a bunch of overweight, fat Jewish guys who sit behind the desk all day long, who do no exercise, and who order all the time from Mr. Broadway to their desk. And I'm like, look at how effective my medication is. Yeah, that's not a controlled experiment, because the variables that are contributing to their long life and their health might have something to do with the fact that they're active most of the day, okay? Right? So that's a not controlled experiment. My friends, if the Mishnah is telling me I learned a lot from my rabbis, more from my friends, most from my students, the only way for that to be a controlled experiment is if I was learning the same thing from each of those groups. Otherwise, how would you be able to prove that your efficacy in learning was greater or greatest from your students? Let's say the students were teaching you the Aleph Bet, and your rabbi was teaching you the most complicated laws in Masechet, in Perek HaZahav, which deal with the laws of Ribit, which are notoriously difficult and complex. So you'd say, I learned the least from my rabbis. No, you learned the most nuanced, the most complex from your rabbis. The only way to have this statement be true is if you were learning the same thing from all of them. So, let's take my example. You learned something from your rabbi. You said, that's not for me, that's for a level way above me. But then your friend told you, you know what I'm doing? I'm doing 10% of my money to tzedakah. Now you're thinking, oh my gosh, my contemporaries are doing it. You have less of a hitnagdut. You have less of an internal opposition to that idea becoming part of your life, correct? All the time, a rabbi can talk about being kosher, koshering the house. A rabbi can talk about eating out, only going to kosher restaurants, even for milk, even for vegetarian, right? And people are like, nah. And then their friend is like, yeah, I'm having the rabbi come, he's koshering the kitchen. You're like, you're doing that? What do you think? What about me, right? I could do that too. But then there's something else that happens. And this sometimes happens with me now. When a student will tell me that they're doing this or they built this into their day, and I'm like, this is my student, if they're doing it. Umitalmidai yoter mikulam. Your kid comes home and your kid tells you, I just did this thing and we learned the translation of the whole silent prayer. I know the whole Amidah. You're like, wait a second, I never learned that. How many parents have come back to Teshuvah because when their kid went to a Jewish school and brought home the Parsha sheet, they had no idea what their kids were talking about. And that spurred a growth. They're thinking, how can it be that my kid knows this and I don't know this? Umitalmidai yoter mikulam. Sometimes the demand or the moral obligation of learning that same thing said from the mouth of a teacher, from the mouth of a contemporary, from the mouth of a child, or from the mouth of someone who's supposed to be your student, right? You feel like if your kid tells you, Ma, don't get angry, it's not important. How many times do you say that to your kid? And then your kid says it back to you. You feel like you might slap him for being chutzpahdik in the moment, but if you had a moment to think about it, you're like, if my kid is capable of seeing that, surely I can as well. So much of what we're learning here, I think, is relevant to the process, not just of teaching students in the world of educational methodology, but also when we want to share something with someone. I'm just trying to think how far to go down this rabbit hole, because this is not such an easy one. There are people who are not maher lishmoa. And a rabbi comes in, and he's gung-ho, and he wants to educate the community, and he wants to inspire the community. There is such a thing about going too fast. And and the people are not maher lishmoa. And they're not ready to hear you yet. They're not so fast on the pickup. So a teacher like that, knowing the crowd that they're trying to communicate with, might take a very different approach. Very slow. And someone who's looking from the outside is saying, I don't understand, what are you doing? How could you do this? How could you use this approach of education with your children? How do you let them do that? How do you let them get away with that? Well, I'm sorry, you do yours, let me do mine. This is the type of kid that is not maher lishmoa. He's kasher lishmoa. It's hard to teach him. But you know what? The things that this kid learns, kasher le'abed. He doesn't ever give up on that. I think it's interesting that in our community there are certain things that took a while to catch on. And I use the word our community here broadly. But now they're part of the lexicon of the community in a place where it's obvious that this is going to be levels that we're going to adhere to. So let's take a look at this one more time. As I do, I like to go through the Mishnah, first quickly, then slowly, and now you know why. It's literally this Mishnah. Maher lishmoa, maher la'abed. What do you do with a kid, with a student? And as I said earlier, a student might be your husband. A student might be your parent. If you are in the position where you are trying to communicate, to teach them, to give them something, you're the teacher, they're the student. What do you do with someone who's maher lishmoa, maher la'abed? They get it right away, but they're just careless in their implementation. What do you do with someone like that? So I think sometimes people think that the response to a kid like that is to slow down the learning process. But actually, that doesn't help at all. I speak very quickly, and my brain I'm like always running. I never stop thinking, right? You know what's incredibly annoying to me as a New Yorker? People who speak slowly. I can't even help myself, by the way. The guy's like, so, what do you think about? And I'm like, no! But your face is like, take your time. I'm aging as you speak. Right? Speaking slowly to someone that's quick-minded, it doesn't help. It doesn't help at all. It just gets them annoyed. So what do you do with a maher lishmoa? Yeah.
You give them more to learn.
You give them more to learn? Interesting. Challenge them. My problem is that this guy, he's got a big hole at the top of the cup, but the hole at the bottom is the same size. So as much as you're pouring in, he's losing out the back end. What do we do with this guy?
Maybe you could create meaning for him of what if you were teaching something that had, you could create, kind of something he can relate to his life or give a deeper meaning that he can, connect with, then he'll be less likely to let up it.
Okay, so one idea might be depth as opposed to speed. I like that. She said depth in something as opposed to speed. I have a few interesting thoughts, and I want you to adapt these to your own experience. I want to talk to you about the maherest lishmoa I ever met. I'm making up words now, haven't I? Am and I. I met this kid who was the most ADHD kid I ever met in my whole life. Anyone know someone like that? I see some smiles over there. Okay. All right, don't tip your hand. This kid, he came to my house and he's like, Rabbi, you know why I'm not religious? And I was like, challenge accepted. No. You know I'm not religious? He goes, because no one has any answers to any of my questions.
Came to the wrong.
Well, I don't know. It remains to be seen, exactly, right? So I said, what do you mean? Like, what kind of questions? So he goes, well, this whole Shabbat thing is ridiculous. I said, what do you mean it's ridiculous? He goes, well, the fact that God in heaven cares if on this specific day of the week I'm not doing work, I'm not doing this. Like, what if I want to do it on Tuesday? Like, you know what? My boss is not Jewish. Why? They're off on Sunday. So now every week they're off on Sunday. They're off on Shabbat. I can't come in on Sunday. Shabbat. You gotta come in on Sunday. He's like talking faster and faster and faster and faster. He's like, what difference does it make? So I'll just stay home on Sunday. You can call me Christian. How old is he? 18, 19. Very ADHD. So I was like, well, you really need to understand, maybe a deeper understanding about what Shabbat means. I didn't even finish his sentence, and he's like, I have so many other questions. And I was like, I think I know why you never got any answers. Right? He couldn't, his attention span was that of a fruit fly on speed. He couldn't, one sentence was too much.
You have to speak faster.
Nope. I stopped answering any of his questions. And here's what I did. I said to him, well, before we go on to the next one, I said, can I ask you a question? When I was talking, he was already thinking about the next thing, because he couldn't focus at all. But when you ask someone a question, especially if the question is really short, you're demanding of them psychologically, physiologically, You're demanding, first of all, that they hear what you've said, because they have to respond. That's how people work. When you ask them a question, they have to hear you and understand you in order to respond. So I said to him, do you ever have a girlfriend? He was like, yeah. I was like, did you make it a year with her? He's like, well, with one of them, yeah, I made a year. I was like, well, did you celebrate an anniversary? I'm asking him these rapid fire questions. Did you ever celebrate an anniversary? He goes, yeah. I said, well, what'd you get her for the anniversary? He goes, I got her flowers. I said, well, what day of the week when did you get her the flowers? He goes, oh, on the day that we first met. I said, that's ridiculous. Why don't you just get her for her on any other day? And he's like, he looked at me, he's like, it was like his mind was blown. All I did was answer the question. I just cut it into such maher lishmoa sizes that he was able to focus long enough to hear what I was actually answering him. I said, the reason why God cares whether or not you do it on Shabbat is because that's the day when he rested. And doing it on that day is the anniversary of his day of rest. And that was it, done. The guy, first he was like, oh my God, Rabbi Farhi, I blew his mind. And he shut out the whole room, and he was like, and what about, and he started asking me every question he wanted to know, because no one had ever had the technique to be able to answer him. The guy flunked out of school, no one ever took the time to make this maher lishmoa guy hear something at the speed at which he needed to hear something. Okay? The crazy thing about this guy is that a short while later, maybe it was a year, I get a picture of him on the porch of Yeshivat Esh HaTorah, where he was celebrating having finished the entire Masechet Makot. A guy who could not sit still long enough for me to finish one sentence. It's remarkable when you start to see that sometimes people need to hear things in a different way. And it's not their fault that they're that way. It's just that they need to be worked with. And you know what happened slowly over time was that his brain learned that actually someone else might have something to say that you might find interesting. And I'm sure in the beginning, his attention span moved from 1 second to 1.1 seconds, and then to 1.2 seconds. And maybe it never got past 20 seconds. But that was a 2,000% increase, you know? And slowly but surely more and more and more and more and more and more. Maher l'shmoa, maher la'abed, there's really nothing to do with that kid at that stage. Because no matter how much you give him, he drops it. If you take slow, he gets annoyed. So what do? You match him and you let him lose it. There's an amazing line, and I just want to share this because I think it teaches something remarkable. They once came to one of the great rabbis and they said how amazing it is that the Ragachover Gaon, he wrote a book called the Tzafnat Paneach. He was a wild genius. Very interesting fellow. Like, he actually looked like a mad professor. He had like unruly hair. And the reason was because he actually had some sort of condition where there were nerve endings. I don't know if they were in his hair or on his scalp. It was incredibly painful for him to cut his hair. Well, I never heard of that before until him. But so he actually even looked the part, like, you know, like he was about to like explode a building and just say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, did I do that?" Like, you know, did I do that type of thing? But he was wildly brilliant. And they said to this rabbi, you know, how the Ragachover Gaon, how he knows all of the Talmud. And the rabbi said, big deal. Of course he knows all the Talmud. He would review the Talmud once a month. He would go through the entire Talmud. He said, of course he knows the Talmud. He only learned it this month. A maher lishmoa, maher la'abed, what do you do with someone like that? You constantly review the information that they need to know because they lose it quickly. So what's the only response? Not to take for granted that what they know, they're going to retain. And this is so important. And I want to explain what this looks like. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time in one part of the Mishnah, because I think the fundamental concept, the outlook, is more important than the nuance and the nitty-gritty part of the details. There was an amazing study that was done in dementia. And if I'm not mistaken, the name of the patient, as it was brought down in the study, was they called him Eugene M. They don't always put the full name in so as to protect the identity of the person. And it was a study that was done by someone in Stanford. You could read an abridged version of this study in one of Malcolm Gladwell's books. And he talks about this fellow Eugene M., where the professor was studying the effects of dementia, of Alzheimer's. And he went to meet this guy, charming fellow, really nice guy. Unfortunately, he had to have a brain surgery, and they took out a piece of his brain in order to save his life. Well, he woke up and he'd lost any form of short-term memory. Okay? He recognized his wife, he recognized his kids, that was long-term memory. But he'd lost any form of short-term memory. So anything that wasn't from beyond a certain point in his past, he simply just could not recall that in any way, shape, or form. To the point where if he went for a walk, right, you know, he would not know how to find his way home. Right? He didn't know where he lived. Because that happened that happened after this break in his ability to remember things. So that he doesn't know where he lives. When the interviewer is sitting there with him talking about his life, he asked him where the bathroom was. The guy could not tell him how to get to the bathroom in his house because he had no idea where it was. And no matter how many times he tried to put it in his mind was accepting no new memories. Is this?
Anterograde amnesia.
I told you. See, I knew it from the first minute. She's an educational psychologist and expert. See?
It's anterograde amnesia. You have your past memories before the surgery, but you can't create new memories.
Now, here's the funny part. Ready for this? Ready for this? Here's the funny part. Now, so we all understand this fellow. We get him. We get his limitations. We know what should work and what should not work. Yeah? Turns out he can go for a walk and he can find his way home. He doesn't know where he lives. He gets up in the middle of the interview. He doesn't know where the bathroom is in his house. He can't tell the guy where to go. But he gets up out of his chair, walks without looking, straight into the kitchen, gets the cereal, pours himself a bowl of cereal, pulls out he knows where the spoons are, but he can't tell you where they are. How does his body know what his mind doesn't know? And don't say muscle memory, because that's not what muscle memory means.
Different part of the brain?
There's a part of the brain which does not store information in the typical way that we store information, okay? A lot, if you want to read more about this in a little bit more depth, it's a great book. I love this book. It's dense, but it's fascinating, from Kahneman, called Thinking Fast and Slow. Amazing. If there ever was a book that should have been written on a Mishnah, it's Thinking Fast and Slow. Maher lishmoa, maher le'abed. Which one? Daniel Kahneman. Now, to me, this is remarkable if you think about this. It means that he knows how to do all these things, but he doesn't know. You have a student that doesn't know how to retain information. There's a way to teach that student in a place in his brain where he does not have the option of forgetting it. Now, this has been literally the study of educational experts for the last maybe 100 years. They started to realize it's similar to the concepts of art therapy, where someone cannot get past something, some form of trauma. But now you introduced art or music or horses, and suddenly the person's capable. How does that work? That means that there are shortcuts to a person's brain. There are shortcuts to a person's ability to retain information, which are not associated with their simple cognitive brain. So if your brain has to remember something and recall it consciously, the person might be a maher lishmoa, maher la'abed. But you meet a student like that, what do? You realize that it is your job, if you want to get them to understand something, it's your job to shake up the process of introducing information. Introduce it quick, that's the only way they take it in. But figure out how to introduce it either consistently quick, so that they can't forget it. It's why organizational psychologists or business psychologists will tell companies to put in the office their mission statement on the walls. Why? So that the person is seeing it. Even though if you asked any one of them, they might be able to recite it from memory. There is a different part of understanding that happens from a constant visual exposure to this intellectual understanding. Is that clear? So, a maher lishmoa, maher la'abed, you might want to use flashcards. There's nothing faster. But it's also a different process. It's not only auditory. Okay? So all these things are that way. You can't train your husband to throw his dirty laundry into the laundry basket. You asked him 50 times, and he, honest to God, keeps forgetting. Can I tell you what to do? Go on Amazon and buy, they have a basketball backboard with a rim right over the laundry basket. And you'll see him shooting threes with his socks from the other side. And you know what he'll do in his male brain? If he misses, he'll go back and get it, go back to the other side of the room and shoot it again. That is part of maher lishmoa, maher la'abed. We don't accept that a person can't learn. We don't accept that premise. We don't accept that a person can't retain. But that means that the onus is upon us to figure out another way of communication and another way of retention. Okay? Stories are a remarkable way of communicating information that does not seem to be penetrating. You know how old that is? Using stories and speeches? Sorry? In truth, since day one. But I'll give you a very specific example. David HaMelech, on whatever level, the Gemara says anyone who says that David HaMelech made a sin, eno ella to'eh, he's making a mistake. Whatever David HaMelech's story was, it's something that maybe is beyond our understanding or comprehension in terms of what really went on internally, okay, etc., etc. However, on some level, for David HaMelech, on his level, it was something that was considered to be incorrect. In fact, David HaMelech says himself, Chatati negdi tamid. My sin is always before me. Because David HaMelech doesn't want to ever forget. Okay? Mechila. Yeah, I think the heavens are giving me a sign right there. So the Gemara says if you say he made a mistake, if you say he made a sin, you're making a mistake. But David HaMelech himself says it's a sin. Okay? So it means that on his level, for a tzaddik of his level, it was what he should have done. Comes Natan Hanavi and says, King David, I have to chat with you if you're free for a few minutes. King David was also not only the king, he was also the head of the Beit Din. And he says, there's a fellow, rich guy, he has there's a poor guy, a rich guy. The poor guy only has one sheep. The rich guy takes the poor guy's sheep. Poor guy, that's all he's got, only the one sheep. Rich guy has thousands, And what does the rich guy do? He takes the sheep of this poor guy and he takes it for himself. What should be the law? And David HaMelech is very sharp. What do you mean? This guy has everything he needs. Why is he going and taking that which belongs to someone else who barely has anything? Right? Natan Hanavi says, that's you. What's he employing? He's employing an educational methodology. Today we would call that straw man technique. Where you present an issue on a scarecrow, on a straw man, and the person is willing to listen because it's not about them and they're not getting defensive. And when the person can see what's correct and what's incorrect on the straw man, then you bring that back to the current situation, and the person has already expressed what they feel about the situation, and now they realize that they're the protagonist in the story. Okay? These are all concepts that we use when something is kasheh lishmoa, when something is difficult to hear. Let me add to this. Sometimes you could have a kasheh la'abed, a person who loses information very, very slowly. That person can be someone you also need to employ a different method of teaching with. Because you know what? If he's maher lishmoa, he understands quickly and he loses slowly. If he understands a point that you then need to clarify, how long does it take for that student to understand the clarification? So as an example, it's always inappropriate to say something that's not true. We teach that, hammer that into kids. Always tell the truth. Always tell the truth. Always tell the truth. And then you have a story, like my daughter, a guest comes over, climbs up onto her lap, and says, I like your necklace more than your face. True? True. So I said, maybe 4, 5. I said to her, I was like, if you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. She said, I said something nice. I said, I like the necklace. Who's right and who's wrong? She's right and I'm wrong. Why? She told the truth And she said something nice. Yeah? That's a kashe la'abed, a person who loses something. It's hard for them. They've learned the lesson really well. But if they're maher lishmoa, you could explain to them that that rule is in effect except when, right? If they're a kashe lishmoa, you might want to hold off teaching them lessons that it's going to take you a really long time to clarify, because it's going to take them very long to understand the exceptions to the rule. Okay? So kashe lishmoa, kashe la'abed is a second style of student. They're very difficult to understand. Now, perhaps there's another way of understanding this based on what you said earlier. Maybe they're not kashe lishmoa at all. Maybe they don't accept a surface level understanding of something, and therefore what comes across as kashe lishmoa is actually not kashe lishmoa. I'll give you an example of this. You have two kids. You tell a kid, you're not allowed to steal. Kid says, got it. Got it. Other kid says, I don't understand. What's his follow-up question to that? Why can't I steal if everything belongs to Hashem? Just as an example. That's not a child who didn't understand. He did understand. He has a follow-up question. And in the way he processes information, if he has an outstanding question in his own brain, he doesn't understand. First kid, perfectly calm, yeah, whatever you say, good, I got it, yes. It's a surface level understanding. Both of them understood what you said. The second kid raised a follow-up point, which in his own brain, he won't accept an idea until he understands all of it. That's not really kashe lishmoa. Let me get it further. Let's say I say to someone, right, you can't eat milk and meat together. First kid, got it. Second kid says, why? I don't understand. He does understand. What's his follow-up question? Why does Hashem care if I eat a cheeseburger? Is this a kashe lishmoa? On the surface, yes. But really not at all. Really not at all. His question is, he's trying to reconcile the moral, the ethical, the logical implications of what you're saying before he will consider it as if he has accepted it. And perhaps that's why it's kashe la'abed. It's not that it's a function of some sort of type of brain, but the thing that made him kashe lishmoa is the thing that makes it kashe la'abed, because he has such a robust, such a multifaceted level of understanding of a subject that it's penetrated his understanding on a intellectual, moral, ethical, religious, practical level. Is that, yeah? Sometimes when we're communicating with people and it seems like they're just being difficult, they're really not being difficult. They're really trying to understand. And it's not that they don't understand because they're stupid. It's they don't understand because their level of understanding is not shut up, listen, nod your head. Their level of understanding happens by questioning, by turning it over, by eventually coming to some sort of process. I don't know if you noticed what you just did. I just shared a process, how someone thinks of something. And while I was sharing it, you know what you did? You did this. Right? That's you processing that information in a multiplicity of ways, thinking about it. Do I buy that? Do I not? Is that right? Is that wrong? Who do I know that's like that? Is that what you were thinking? Right? Can you tell me, what were you thinking?
I was just like thinking in general, and I noticed that it's a projector thing on the ceiling.
Just I was thinking in general, then I noticed there was a projector on the ceiling, and then I wondered, why is there one over there? Is that one? That was amazing! That was one of my favorite moments of this whole year. Thank you.
It looked like something else.
It looked like what they talk about in NLP, which is, I don't know, part science, part pseudoscience, but the concept is true, even if the application is maybe a little bit with neuro-linguistic programming, where they talk about how people store their information in their brains and their memories in different ways, in auditory, in pictures, in emotions, and whether or not, again, your eye movements relate that. That's what people do when they try and recall a memory. Why are they moving their eyes? Now, whether or not it reflects, why are you trying to do this when where was the bar mitzvah? Not in the sky. So what NLP teaches is that the direction in which the eye moves reflects the place in the brain that the person is storing that information. How was that information stored? Right brain, left brain, etc., etc. Now again, whether you buy that or not, the point of the eye movements is definitely part of the memory recall. Similar, by the way, they did a study where if you tied people's hands together, would they be as capable of communicating effectively? Their hands. Yeah, fascinating. And it wasn't even people that were overly animated with their hands. Right? But again, it wasn't even people and they didn't even need necessarily movements. It wasn't even information that you didn't have to say it's over there. Right? I found it so interesting that you see that there's different parts to the mental processing of information. And whatever reason, psychologically, or biologically perhaps, you're moving this way and then moving that way and processing a thought or trying to recall a memory, somehow what we're seeing is the physical manifestation of memory recall, whatever it means. So I think that's part of meeting this student, kasher lishmoa, kasher le'abed. Maher lishmoa v'kasher le'abed. Now, there are those that the best portion is left to those that understand things very quickly, and never forget whatever they learned. Amazing. But you see, again, what a beautiful thing it is that the Torah, that the Mishnah doesn't say that makes you a better person. You were given a good portion. Is someone with a stronger grasp, quicker grasp, better memory, are they a person that's closer to God? Are they a person? Now, on one level, you might look at that and say, what are you talking about? Of course they are. They're able to learn more. They know more about how to be a good servant of Hashem. They know the laws. They don't forget the laws. Obviously, that person's going to be better, situated to serve Hashem. But that's not what the Mishnah says. It doesn't say that's Chasid, Tzaddik, Chacham. It doesn't even say Chacham. And the point is that this guy was granted a good portion. And what's so interesting to me about that is that in actual fact, what the Torah is communicating with this, what the Mishnah is communicating with this, is that what if you struggle to understand or memorize, and you find yourself a lot of time not knowing the law or what you're supposed to do, you do your best to understand or call a rabbi or look it up or whatever you do, right? Your intellectual prowess is not a barometer for how a person fulfills the job that they came to this world to do. And yes, we need to push ourselves to the max of our capabilities. But me at max capability is not going to be the same as Chacham Ovadia at max capability, where he had a photographic memory. And I'm not talking about, when people say, oh, my rabbi photographic memory remembers everything. I'm talking about actual photographic memory. They would ask him, do you know this? When he lost his eyesight, they built his library and he moved from house to one house to another. You ever see I used to wear these sunglasses. It weren't so he would look cool. His sunglasses, because his eyes were incredibly sensitive to the light. And if you saw him, as I did many times, what he would do is he would take his glasses, put them like this. Half of it was in his beard. I don't have one. But he would then take the book he was trying to read, and you know how he would read without his glasses? Like this. I have a picture of him reading from a Sidur. Again, the guy has a photographic memory. He's quoting entire bits from the Talmud, from the Piskei Halacha by heart. He knows Mincha, like, you know what I mean? But he read it from a Sefer, because that's the ideal way to pray, is to read it from the book, you know? But he would read it like this. So when he was in his older age, where he really could not see, so they moved his apartment from one place to the other. And they rebuilt his bookshelves in exactly the same form as they were in his old apartment, because of his failing eyesight. He knew where every single book was exactly based on where it was on the shelf. Anyway, he moved into his house and he was very upset. He was very upset, very sad. He said, "What's the matter?" He said, "I can't find any of my books. Nothing's where it's supposed to be." The contractor had built the bookshelves a few inches taller off the ground, so nothing was where he reached for it, nothing. He quoted pamphlets that he remembered. I remember Rabbi Dweck came to him and asked him about a certain psak halacha from the Ben Ish Chai, and he says, everyone quotes a Ben Ish Chai and I can't find it. It's not in any of his books. Chacham Ovadia says, "You're right, it's not in any of his books." He says, "He didn't say it?" He says, "He did say it." He says, "But you'll find it. It's in one of the pamphlets. You know these pamphlets you have in a synagogue on Shabbat with Divrei Torah? The Ben Ish Chai wrote something for one of these pamphlets called the Rav Pa'alim. He said, it's in this and this week's edition, this and this year, on this and this page. If you can't find it, you could borrow my copy. The tshuva, you'll know it's the right page because the corner of the page is ripped." That was Chacham Ovadia's memory. So, obviously he's going to be more connected to Hashem than me. Even if I tried as hard as he did, even if I learned as many hours, even if I applied myself, And the point is that his job is different than mine, and his mission is different than mine. And Hashem doesn't want that from me. Hashem wants something else from me. Maybe Hashem wants this from me. What does Hashem want from a mother who's got 10 kids running around the house? Maybe this is what he wants her to build: a wholesome, a happy, a productive. Maybe that's what he wants. Maybe he wants from a man or from a woman, maybe who can't sit still. Maybe he wants him to build a business and give tremendous amount of money to tzedakah. Maybe that's what he was cut out to do. And this Mishnah, by not labeling better ability as better as a person, is communicating that. This person wasn't given a good chelek, but what can they do with that? Kasher l'shmoa, maher la'abed. And I want to end with one last piece, but I'll take a question first. Yes?
When you gave us the paper and I looked at it quickly, it struck me immediately that how different this page is from the last few weeks that I've been studying here. And I'm sitting and I said, who are those Rabbi? Last week and the week before, and all of a sudden, I'm sitting, there must have been many of them, maybe even the same period, and it's a different language, and it's a different atmosphere, and it's understanding, and no, we are not naming, there's no Asha even, we are going to talk about how different we are, and to remember that because we are not born the same, and some will be. And I'm kind of trying to know why this thing is here, what happened, what was the change, what are the people behind it? It's so different.
So I kind of alluded to this right in the beginning by saying that there's one fundamental difference between this and the weeks prior. One is a character trait. And no matter what you're born with, whatever character trait you're born with, even if you're spicy and fiery, a person can, with time, train themselves and learn to be less angry or to be more forgiving. Here we're talking about literally the way your brain is built. And what the Chachamim were being very careful about is, let's not, like in our society today, although it's very open and welcoming and non-judgmental, there are times when it's non-judgmental that it should be judgmental. Like, there is a fine path to walk between talking about people who are in prison not being treated like animals. Yes, that's 100% true. we should be careful and make sure that even if someone needs to be punished for their crimes, that they are treated with at least the most basic elements of human dignity and respect. At the same time, there's no need to turn that person into a hero and to turn the person who was an aggressor and a violent criminal into a victim. Our society somehow doesn't have, with all of the talk about, not seeing things in extremes, they've somehow lost the art of being able to understand where it is important to be judgmental and recognize that this person is a danger to themselves and to society. I'm sure all the best intentions were in place when they came up with bail reform. But they are turning violent criminals onto the street in the name of justice and compassion. And these are people who will hurt and are hurting people again. Violently. It's astonishing. And Adams, I don't know if you read his statement recently in the newspaper, where he said we want to be able to turn the right over to the courts to differentiate between cases of bail reform where it's a necessary part of fixing the judicial system and where it's just an abused privilege that was designed to be able to be used in the best of cases from being abused in the worst of cases. So the Chachamim chose, when a person says, oh, I'm just an angry person, that's who I am. Yeah, I abuse people emotionally, physically. Accept me that way. I'm going to punch my wife in the face because she didn't do what I wanted. Aw, chelek ra. No, rasha. If you're not willing to call out evil or wicked behavior, if you're not willing to call out the things that people can choose to change and must change, then you wind up with this extremely progressive society where you get mugged on the street in broad daylight. And sorry, that's not progression. That's not progression. So I think that's part of why last week's Mishnah says one thing, and when we're talking about a person who cannot change, that's something else. Hashem should bless us always to be understanding, to recognize people, how quick they pick things up, how quickly they lose it, understand people, change our abilities and our methods of communicating, both with regards to children, to students, whether it's with regards to spouses, to parents, anyone you're trying to communicate a message to understand that people think, process, take in, and retain differently, and through that ensure that the ultimate goal, which is that there's some level of retention of what you're trying to get done, gets done in the best possible method. Thank you so much for coming. See you next week.